Okay, now we're in part 2 of personality theory and assessment. And what we're going to be focusing on in this part is mostly on trait theory, and it's looking at personality as a series of traits, characteristics. And we're going to touch on that, and we're also going to look at learning theory and how they explain personality. And we'll also touch on humanistic psychology or humanistic personality theory. This is Maslow and Carl Rogers. And then we're going to touch base with the role that our genetics might play in our personality. And then the last piece will be an overview of assessment strategies. How do we assess personality? And we'll look at some of the assessment strategies that are being employed currently. And some of these will be the kinds of assessments we use in business to assess personality for specific types of work and jobs. And some are also used in psychological disorders and looking at personality theory as well. All right then, so good luck and I hope you enjoy.
Okay, now we're going to start into trait theory. Trait, a stable and consistent personal characteristic used to describe or explain personality. So if you've been told you're sociable, moody, shy, or friendly, then that would be considered a trait. Trait theory is an attempt to explain personality and differences among people in terms of personal characteristics, and they're fundamental building blocks of personality. So we're going to look at some theorists in the area of traits. And the first one we'll touch base with is Gordon Allport. And Gordon Allport is a person felt like a person inherits a unique set of raw materials for given traits, which are then shaped into experience. And he used a term called cardinal trait. And a trait so pervasive and outstanding that at almost every act seems traceable to its influence. So cardinal trait would be like to say it was your most important characteristic about your personality. A person could be known or identified by this particular trait. I have Abe Lincoln there because Abraham Lincoln was often seen as and called Honest Abe because of the honesty he displayed when he was a young man. This trait would be considered his cardinal trait. Trait that would be mentioned in a writing, in a writing of a careful letter for a recommendation. You would indicate these key or cardinal traits. Now, from Gordon Allport came Raymond Cattell, and he looked at traits as having surface traits and source traits. Surface traits were observable qualities of personality. Using observation and questionnaires, certain cluster surface traits appear together time after time. Helpful, honest, kind seems to occur together, and that would be considered a surface trait. Whereas source traits, these are deeper, more general, underlying personality factors. Now, he found 23 source traits found in a normal individual, he felt. He studied 16 of them via the 16 personality factor questionnaire. The amount of source traits varies individually. For example, intelligence. Now, we move on to Han Eisnick. He did what was called the five-factor model. I'll put it up there. There we go. Five-factor theory. And you can see around the wheel these 5 qualities. Openness to experience. This factor would be, or this trait, open to experience. They're imaginative, intellectually curious, broad-minded, as opposed to someone who would be concrete-minded, practical, and narrow interests. The conscientiousness, high version of this would be someone who is dependable, organized, reliable, responsible, thorough, hardworking, and perseverance-based. Someone with low conscientious would be someone who we would describe as undependable, disorganized, impulsive, unreliable, irresponsible, careless, negligent, and lazy. So these were on a continuum. Either you were high or you were low in this, and you could be anywhere, of course, in between. And these were factors that influence your personality. Extroversion. Extroverts would be sociable, outgoing, talkative, assertive, persuasive, decisive, active, whereas introverts were more withdrawn, quiet, passive, retiring, introspective. And again, this was on a continuum. Agreeableness, high agreeableness, you were pleasant, good-natured, warm, sympathetic, and cooperative, whereas low in agreeableness were unfriendly, unpleasant, aggressive, argumentative, cold, hostile, and vindictive. And neuroticism, and this is an interesting, don't misunderstand neuroticism, emotional stability versus instability. So neuroticism didn't necessarily mean all bad. You could be emotionally stable. So experience negative emotions, moody, irritable, nervous, and worried, whereas someone with emotional stability would be emotionally stable, calm, even-tempered, easygoing, and relaxed. And he felt that these were influential into developing one's sense of personality. Now, here we have Albert Bandura. He was a social psychologist, did a lot of work in the area of social psychology and child development, but he also entered into this field of personality. And he looked at what was called reciprocal determinism, the influential mutual relationship among behavior, cognitive factors, and environment. So he looked at this relationship between your environment, what reinforced you, the models that were there, cognitive factors, your beliefs, expectancies, and personal dispositions, and your personal behavior, observable behavior, what you were seen to do, and saw this relationship as being influential in your personality. Now, he introduced a term called self-efficacy, and this is the perception of ability to perform competently whenever attempted. Self-efficacy is this sense of confidence that you'd have. High self-efficacy, people with high self-efficacy would approach new situations confidently. They set high goals, persist in efforts because they believe success is likely. Whereas low self-efficacy expect failure. They avoid challenges. They give up on tasks found difficult and are likely to experience depression more. And so he viewed that as being fairly instrumental in the role of personality in terms of characteristics or traits. Adding on to that was Julian Rotter, and he introduced self-efficacy and locus of control. And locus of control explains how people account for what happens in their life. Either you have strong or weak internal locus of control or external locus of control. Internal locus of control see themselves as in control of their behavior and consequences. That what happens in their life happens because of what they do, and they take responsibility for those things. Where someone with external locus of control sees fate, luck, or chance as being controlling of behavior and consequences. They're less likely to change behavior due to reinforcement. They do see reinforcement tied to their actions. They tend to be procrastinators and have lower life satisfaction, because they have a tendency to believe that there's nothing that they can do to correct it. It's just life happening to them. Okay, here we are looking at humanistic psychology, and here Abraham Maslow, he assumed that people are assumed to have a natural tendency towards growth and realization to their fullest potential. And this theory is more optimistic and sensitive to emotional experiences, even though they are difficult to test scientifically. And his motivational factors are the root of personality and the hierarchy of needs. And if you see there, you got, excuse me, physiological needs, safety needs, belonging and self-esteem, self-actualization, as all towards developing our fullest potential. Self-actualizers actually perceive reality, and judge honestly and judge quickly on the spot and to recognize fake and dishonesty. Are comfortable with life, they accept themselves and others and nature, and have a good humor and tolerance. They believe they have a mission to accomplish, feel a need to devote their life to some sort of larger good, and don't depend on externally or external authority or other people. They depend on themselves, and they are inner driven. They're autonomous and independent. They feel strong fellowship with all humanity, have relationships characterized by deep, caring, and loving bonds, and can laugh at themselves and have a sense of humor and never involved in hostility and criticism. So he viewed that moving up the hierarchy of needs, you could establish a more complete and more sensitive and self-actualized personality. Now, Carl Rogers, who worked with Maslow, felt different, or didn't feel differently, took a different approach to it. He viewed conditions of worth. Positive regard hinges on parental conditions. Live and act according to someone else's values. Gain positive regard by denying our true selves, inhibiting behavior, denying or distorting perceptions, and closing up parts of our experience causes stress, anxiety, and threatens self structure. So the goals of his therapy, and he established a therapeutic approach to develop to counseling, was to enable people to open up to experience, begin to live according to one's own internal values. Unconditional positive regard was a key phrase for him. Unqualified caring and non-judgmental acceptance would bring out the strongest in people. Designed to reduce threat, eliminate conditions of worth, and bring persons into tune with one's true self. And so really to look at how you would get to your sense of who you were personality-wise was a process. It wasn't something that you were born with. Now, if we move to looking at personality assessments, usually they are involved in three different sort of manners. First is observation, used in a variety of settings to assess personality. You might be viewed, might be done in a hospital or in a school or in a clinic or in a workplace to see a variety of environments. Interviews to help diagnose and treat a patient. Screen applicants for admission to colleges is where we use interviews. Special programs and evaluate job applicants and performance. Person's tone of voice, speech, mannerisms, and gestures and general appearance are also considered. Structured interviews include prearranged questions and formats. And then rating scales. These are used to record data from an interview and observations, provide a standardized format, help focus raters' attention on the relevant traits. Limitation ratings can be subjective, and it's difficult when you're doing rating scales, and that's why they try to make them very clear and specific. There's a condition that's called the halo effect, the tendency of raters to be excessively influenced by the overall evaluation of a person by one or a few favorable or unfavorable traits. Traits or attributes not on the scale can influence rating attractiveness or similarity to a rater. So this is the basic premise by which personality assessments are done, either just through observation, through a series of interviews, or through rating scales. We can look also at inventories. Now, inventories are a paper and pencil test containing questions about a person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Measures several dimensions of personality and can be scored according to standard procedure. Yields a personality profile. Where does a person fall on various dimensions or on various traits? And this can be done in a variety of different ways. The MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, is one example. It's widely used and is heavily researched personality inventory. It aids in diagnosis of psychiatric problems and disorders. Originally, it was administered as a group to a group of psychiatric patients. Used over 1,000 questions about attitudes, feelings, symptoms. Retained 550 items that differentiate psychiatric patients from those considered normal. The second edition added items of an alcoholism, drug abuse, suicidal tendency, eating disorders, and type A behavior. And so really it's an inventory of Q&A, and from this series of questions would pull out what might be considered a personality profile. Projective tests are a little different. This is the Rorschach ink blot method, a personality test in which people respond to ink blots, drawings of ambiguous human situations, respond to incomplete sentences, project their own inner thoughts, feelings, and fears and conflicts on these blocks. So what does it represent? What you're seeing in the top left hand are the cards that are represented by the Rorschach ink blot method. While viewing 10 ink blots, a test taker is asked to describe everything he or she thinks and feels about, what each ink blot looks or resembles. Standardized scoring developed aids in normative data. It just, over a lot of time, there's been a consistent degree, if you will, of what does this represent, and so there's been an ability to normalize it to some degree. And then we can also look at the last one here, and this is what's called the Thematic Appreciation Test, the TAT. This is useful in assessing personality and achievement. One blank card and 19 other cards showing vague or ambiguous black and white drawings of human figures in various situations. The test taker is told, make up a plot or a story which might be used in this illustration. What is the relationship between the individual and the picture? What are the thoughts and the feelings? What will be the outcome? The strength of the TAT is its capacity to reveal things that the patient is unwilling to tell or unable to tell. Time-consuming, it's difficult to administer a score, relies heavily on the interpretive skills of the examiner, and it may reflect too strongly on the person's temporary motives and emotions. But therein lies an overview, and a quick overview, I admit, on personality theory and personality tests. Thank you very much.